Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Let's Steal 'em a selection peachy update for the 4th. Oh, my God. All right, I got to do the caucuses and the DNC first. I just have to. And then I'll spend a little bit of time on the coronavirus thing because so far, the scenario that I believe is playing out is verifying, and this is a very important thing for everybody to understand. I can still be wrong, by the way, but if I am going to be wrong, we should know somewhere towards the end of the week. We're getting into that range where the wrongness has to start to show up, otherwise it's going to be rightness instead. Anyway, caucuses first. You had one job. That would be counting votes. So the DNC last night, shortly after the caucuses closed, normally what happens is about an hour later you have essentially all the results in. So it's like most elections, except that they're done a little differently because caucuses are kind of weird. You go in and you meet with people, you talk, you caucus, and then there's a viability threshold, and anybody doesn't meet that, you can either, if you supported a candidate, didn't meet it, your two options are, one, go home. In other words, your vote doesn't count because you voted for somebody that does not meet the threshold. In this case, it's 15%. Or the alternative is you can say, well, I kind of liked Creepy Joe and his fondle little girls thing, but since he didn't get 15%, I'm going to go support Buttgig or, God, you know what? I will never get the pronunciation of that guy's name right. I guess I could just call him Mayor Pete. That would be all right. Or Sanders or Warren or whoever. Anyway, you're given an opportunity to switch your allegiance, which is something that doesn't happen in a general election. And one of these days, I'm going to do a whole podcast on ranked choice voting because there's a lot of people that think that is basically that is the solution to democracy, and I'm here to tell you it's not. It is the solution to bring about tyranny in a big way. And if we ever were to adopt it on a mass basis, I will tell you right now, there are very few things that I think would justify a flat-out revolution in the United States. That's pretty close to the threshold. Doesn't quite get there, but it gets close. And sometime I'll explain why. It would be kind of interesting to do one of these things with a call-in kind of thing, get Radigan on the other side of this and have a debate back and forth with him. I wonder if he'd give me half an hour and do that, and then we could put it up on YouTube and, where the rest of the podcasts go and see what happens with that. Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, so the thing that's interesting about the caucuses last night is that supposedly there was this new means of reporting results from the precincts, which was an app. And something went wrong, and all of a sudden the DNC, the Iowa party, says, oh, wait, we've got an inconsistency in the data. We're doing quality control checks. And so then, allegedly, the report is they were asking precinct captains to phone in, but there were insufficient numbers of people to take the phone calls. People were sitting on hold for an hour, then they got hung up on. They actually had one precinct captain that got hung up on air on CNN last night. That was hilariously funny. And so you essentially, what you have is a party that can't manage to count votes. Okay, now remember something very, very important about primaries. You're not guaranteed a fair contest. I've talked about this dozens of times over the 10 plus years that I've been doing the market ticker and these podcasts now more recently. I have pointed out that these are presidential preference primaries. And when Bernie got screwed by game playing last time around, and by the way, they're doing it again. They changed the debate rules now to get Bloomberg on the stage. He does not qualify under the rules, and for a party that screams about income inequality and oligarchs and corruption and good God, man! What is buying your way onto a debate stage? Are you not an oligarch? Folks, you should go back and remember the article that I did. I think it was about a month and a half, 2 months ago, where I talked about the fact that of the people that are in the race, and you have the two billionaires, you have Steyer and Bloomberg. I don't know a lot about Steyer's background. He just isn't interesting enough to me. But Bloomberg, on the other hand, is absolutely an oligarch. Virtually everybody who was in the Billionaires Club today got that way by some kind of a scam. It may have been a legal scam, but it was still a scam. They got that way through some form of monopolist practice. That's what makes people oligarchs, okay, is exploiting the lack of efficiency and the ability to slam the door on competitors and then take outsized profits, because nobody lets you sit there with a 20 or 30 or 40% pre-tax operating margin in any line of business for very long without coming in to try to challenge you, because it's just too easy. I mean, when I was running my internet company, we had a 43% pre-tax operating margin for a number of years. When I sold the company to Windstar, they started their diligence. Of course, you exchange NDAs because you're going to get information from them that you're not supposed to release, and they're going to get a whole bunch of it from you. And we sent them our first set of financials that, basically, here's the composites. Told the accountants, okay, go ahead and send them over. And they do, and about 2 hours later, I get a phone call from the guy that was the lead doing the investigation on the thing, and he essentially accuses me of lying. Doesn't quite come out and say it that way, but he's like, what are you leaving out, basically? It's essentially the gist of the conversation. I know I said nothing. This is what you have here is operating results on a cash basis. I mean, yes, there are things that we accrue, but here's an income statement. Here's a P&L. Here's the money in the bank. By the way, nobody ever lets you forge a bank statement. Isn't it funny how that works? The bank just doesn't let you get away with that. I said, you want independent verification? I said, you got an NDA, you got authorization. Call a bank. Is there this much money on deposit? And they just didn't believe it because, frankly, almost nobody ever has that kind of an operating margin and gets away with it for very long. We had 100 competitors in the market at that point in time, and this, however, then the oligarchs came in and started squeezing people. And so we had all the games that went on with the DSL providers, then we had the cable companies. And not too long after that, most of the firms that were in the space where we were, within a few years, they'd been swallowed up or they were gone. And why does that happen? Well, because competition just hates to see those kinds of margins. All right? People look at that and say, well, that's too damn easy. The truth is, it isn't always that easy. There were an awful lot of people in that business that had more normal, 10-15% operating margins. We had 43 because I was very good at software, and I was also very good at designing systems and networks that cost a lot less to build. And as I have expounded on many times, you don't make money by selling things. You make money by buying things. Okay, it's what you spend, not how you price, because somebody will always come along and try to undercut you on price. That's what competition is. Anyway, Bloomberg got his money, for the most part, by exploiting data feeds that nobody else can get. Okay, exclusive arrangements and things like this. And so his terminals are on every trading desk all over the place. But it's because literally for some of what is offered there, an awful lot of it, there is not another choice. Right, now, how do you get that in a competitive market, in a free market? You don't, which is, that can't happen in a market where you actually have open and free competition. So the fact that it happens is all the evidence you need that somebody's playing games. Now, whether it's against the law is another question entirely. However, that, oligarchs, remember, an oligarch is not somebody necessarily who's a criminal, all right, because laws are instituted by men. An oligarch is somebody who's exploiting a monopoly position and doing things. That's what Mike is. Sorry for all you guys that think that he's the savior of the world. He's not. He's a pig. He hasn't made his money in a competitive market. What competitive market? All right. Anyway, the DNC is literally on the verge of imploding into a black hole over this. I have my suspicions that the real problem is that they don't want to report anything that makes Bernie Sanders look like he's the runaway winner here. And they especially don't want to talk about the precincts where Biden was non-viable, which apparently were a number of them. There were a couple that I was watching last night specifically. C-SPAN had a couple of them on. And Biden did not meet the viability threshold, so he did not get reported out with any delegates in those precincts. I don't know how widespread that was throughout the entire state, but when you see somebody who's supposed to be the front runner, who is the so-called establishment candidate that comes out of a caucus non-viable, and you have four other candidates that grab delegates, he doesn't get any. That's a problem, and I suspect that is a large part of what's driving this thing. By the way, there's all kinds of Hillary Clinton holdovers in the DNC's process here. But how hard is it to do an app like this, folks? I got to tell you, this really bothers me. Okay, because if you were the DNC for Iowa, or the RNC, or whoever, and you called me up and you said, look, I need an application that runs on, say, Android phones or tablets, and can centrally report results to a database. We need audit trails. We need to be able to, basically that sort of thing. I could write that, put that together for you in a couple of weeks. And then I would say, look, writing is not going to be all that expensive. I said, but I need, if you expect this to work in, 200 precincts in a city, and, there's a couple of thousand precincts in total, 5,000 maybe or whatever. I'm going to need a test group that can put a synthetic load on this thing, make sure that it holds up during that period of time. And I'm not going to give it to you until that passes. That's the certification test. And you're going to have to come up with those people. So the most reasonable way to do that is you get the precinct captains to do as a dry run a few days ahead of time or a few weeks ahead of time, ideally a week or two, maybe more, so that if there's any kind of a problem with capacity or whatever have you, we can take care of it. Good God, folks, there's more people on my forum, and I'm not, a Matt Drudge. We can't manage to get serialized transactions, repeatability, and competent. What in the hell is wrong with these people? You want to actually run the country? You want to run the country, but you can't run a caucus. I'm stunned, folks. This is one state. All right, let's talk coronavirus. So after I did the podcast yesterday, there were some updates that got posted to the 2.2 and 2.3 numbers on the GIS and data site. The trend has continued. There is, when I take all the updated stuff and put it in there is a little bit of a belly in this curve. This is making me a little unhappy in China. It ought to be making the Chinese extremely unhappy, because up until a couple of days ago, it looked to me like we basically had a straight line kind of progression. Now, as of this morning, looking at this, I got a little bit of a belly in that curve, and that is very bad. Why? Because exponential curves have that kind of visual presentation. Now, it's very small, and it doesn't suggest the kind of breakout sort of virulence that a lot of people are screaming about, but it's there, and I don't like the look of that at all. The other side of it, however, is that outside of mainland China, the counts are stable. U.S. 11, Germany 12, Japan 20. Japan's been 20 for a little while, by the way. You got a couple more ticking up in Hong Kong and South Korea and Singapore and places like this. But the point being that there is a stability outside of China itself. Now, what does this mean? This means that there is a problem with what we're being told when it comes to how this thing how this thing spreads and the virulency of that spread. In other words, R naught is not a constant, folks. It depends on environment to a significant degree. And remember that the rule for viruses, or any disease for that matter, is that an R naught under 1 means that the virus will burn itself out, or disease will burn itself out. And the reason is, for each person that's infected, on average, they infect less than one other person. And so over a relatively short period of time, you get exponential decay instead of exponential growth, and the new case rate becomes just the random incidence here and there, instead of the kind of exponential expansion. Now, any R naught over 1 means that you are going to have an exponentially expanding curve. Eventually, all diseases wind up with an R naught under 1. Why? Because you either kill all the people who get it, or they get it, they get some form of immunity, can't get it again for some period of time. Now, sometimes that immunity is not lifetime. Sometimes it's only good for a few weeks, but it's enough to dampen down retransmission. And so the R naught starts to fall. In this case, when the first pieces of information came out that this thing was shedding in feces, I became very interested because, first off, a virus that does not normally, that doesn't attack and infect the gut, in other words, not stomach flu, okay, or an intestinal flu or something like cholera, most of the time you don't find a significant load in feces. All right, so yeah, the common flu, for example, even though it does sometimes produce diarrhea. In fact, it's somewhat of one of those symptoms. Even without diarrhea, the fact of the matter is that it's a respiratory infection, and so you expect that the transmission route is via people sneezing and coughing. All right. Well, then the question becomes: all right, if I'm asymptomatic, but I'm contagious, how am I spreading the virus to other than someone who is an intimate partner? Because if you and I are standing 3 or 4 feet apart, I'm breathing, you're breathing, and neither of us cough or sneeze, how do you get it? Okay? Well, unless you do something like shake my hand and I've got virus on my fingers, all right, then it's very difficult for you to pick up enough viral load to become infected. And remember, folks, it's not, you don't need one particle. You need a certain amount. And it's viruses are kind of funny things. The odds of a single viral particle being the cause of an infection is very low. You need a certain load of them to be presented into your system, and then they get into your bloodstream, they get through the mucosa. And one of the things that a lot of people are missing that are running around face masks is that a primary route of entry is through your eyes. And what that means is that the conjunctiva specifically, which is the wet surface of skin that rides around the outside of your eyeball where your eye socket is, and which protects and shields your eyeball. That area is a primary route of entry for viruses and bacteria. And so if you are wearing a face mask, you've got a cover on your mouth and your nose. As I've pointed out, for surgical masks, the primary thing that they do is prevent you from infecting other people. They're not all that effective in preventing you from becoming infected. And the reason is, first off, they don't cover the eyes at all, okay? And secondly, they're not designed to filter all air on inhalation, all right, which is what has to happen. You have to make very sure that absolutely nothing gets past that thing without having to go through the filter medium. And surgical masks just don't do that job, all right, to kind of go around your ear loops. Now, N95s, on the other hand, are designed for that purpose, and properly fitted, they're quite effective. They're also a pain in the ass to wear. They're hot, they're nasty, but they are not very effective at filtering outbound particles. In other words, you sneeze or cough. And the reason for that is that they typically have an exhale valve in them for the very specific reason that you don't want to rebreathe the hot, moist, nasty air. That makes the mask extremely uncomfortable. And so as a result, there's an exhaust valve. And when you breathe out, that valve opens. It's a little flapper valve made out of latex typically. And that opens. And then when you inhale, you draw air through the medium, okay, through the outside fabric medium. And those are quite effective at filtering out inhaled particles, which is what they're made for. They're dust and nuisance masks for when you're like sanding paint and things like this. You don't want to inhale that stuff. They're quite effective at filtering out viral particles, but your eyes aren't covered. Now, if you want to wear eye protection actual wraparound eye protection. That's not 100% either, because you can't seal that unless you have positive pressure. But it does prevent most droplets from getting to your eyes. A standard pair of glasses is going to be a little bit effective, but again, they don't have side shields. Okay, so while that would be pretty effective at keeping a blast of expelled particles from getting you directly from the front, it doesn't do a damn thing for the guy standing next to you and coughs, and turns his head a little bit, and you get some of the side blast. So, the scaremongers have been running around telling us that this thing has an R naught of 4, and oh, by the way, we're all going to die. Well, it obviously doesn't have an R naught of 4 on a homogeneous basis, because if it did, we'd be seeing a crazy takeoff in caseloads in places like here, the United States, Germany, Australia, places where they crap in toilets. Modern white man sanitation. Yeah. That, crap, or as they say, crapper sanitation, even though he was the improver of the flush toilet, not the inventor. Anyway, point being, so far, that lift in cases, that beginning of the belly of the curve, if you will, in the United States and other countries, has not happened. And unless it does, we are missing something about the R naught path. And that strongly implies that in places like the United States and these other countries, R naught is much lower. Why is it lower? Well, if and I emphasize if, this is a disease that is primarily spread by fecal routes, and not so much by expelled droplets, especially if you're during the time before you start to be symptomatic. That's going to be a problem in a number of places. Now, if this proves up, one of the things that I'm very concerned about is when this gets into places like India, and it probably will, if it hasn't already. I don't even know if we'll get any kind of meaningful reporting out of India if it does either, because there's a tremendous problem in terms of infrastructure. I mean, China has a lot of people crammed into small spaces, and China also has what we would consider to be disgusting practices in terms of sanitation, food preparation, and things like this, which is an ideal path for pathogens that happen to run in that sort of a transmission mechanism to spread. India's worse by a lot. So, I mean, there's images flying around on the web that says, when I have a sudden urge, the beach is always open. No, we're not kidding. They really do that. Indoor plumbing is something that's unheard of in a lot of parts of that country. So, but in terms of what we have at this point, folks, while I am unhappy to see this change in the curve this morning, and we'll see what we have tomorrow. Although you're probably not going to get a podcast update from me tomorrow. You'll probably get one on Thursday. Doubt I'll be doing one tomorrow. But if this proves out, then China, while they are getting somewhere in terms of containment, it is not contained. Okay, and I want you to keep this in mind. There was a reason to believe that China was achieving containment. They haven't quite gotten there yet, but they were achieving it. As of this morning, I can't say that. And that's not a good thing. Okay? I need to see 4 or 5 days where we have that breakthrough on the curve. And like I said, we've had a straight line here now for the last week or so. Things have looked pretty good, like we were going to get that breakthrough. Unfortunately, this morning, as I look at the graph, I got to take that one back. All right, so from within the China environment, this looks very bad. In terms of what it means for the rest of the world, though, not so much, because, again, we haven't seen the breakout anywhere else. Anywhere else. And this, something ain't right there, folks. Okay? Because we should be seeing it here in the United States. One final update, and that is that the thing I was trying to run to the ground in the Chicagoland area has turned into a dead end, and so I've abandoned it essentially. You probably won't hear me talk about it again unless something comes up. There's a possibility that it's a scam, that it's somebody running a game. We don't know, but I can't get enough information to either verify or directly refute it. And so for the time being, as long as our U.S. count does not show evidence of a breakout at all, I'm going to abandon that as being not worth the further investigative time. But we'll see where this goes. Anyway, that's what I got for today, folks. Hey, Bernie, all those people in your campaign that said that you were gonna, basically they were gonna burn Milwaukee to the ground, and this. Can I ask a question? Was Iowa enough for you to be convinced that the DNC is so crooked they can't even manage to run a caucus? Just a question. I mean, take a guy. Have a good one.